listening to Everyday Engineering, the City of Madison's engineering podcast where we talk about infrastructure. Complex topics explained simply, from the water that flows down your drain to the rain and snow that drains into the lakes. By way the curbs and streets we design. City engineering touches your life in so many ways, explained right now in Everyday Engineering. There are so many ways to get around our beautiful city of Madison, but did you know that the city actually has a specific approach to maximizing our transportation system? We have two experts here today from our transportation department at the City of Madison, Department of Transportation's Liz Callin, thank you, and also our Transportation Demand Management Coordinator, Trent Shultz, joining us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, we're going to have a rip-roaring time talking about TDM.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, let's first start up with, tell us a little bit of who you are, what you do here at the city as it relates to TDM. Liz, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So I'm a transportation planner with the City Department of Transportation, and I get to work on a lot of fun projects that all kind of feed into this idea of transportation demand management. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get on, but I get to help with some of the bus rapid transit rollout and planning. I'm working on a study to look at passenger rail station locations in Madison, and we're also looking at different ways to kind of optimize curb use in Madison. So there's all of these different angles that we kind of try to approach this transportation demand management concept, and I'm kind of lucky because I get to work on a lot of different stuff related to that.
Who knew it was so specific, but we've got the experts. It's great.
Yeah.
Yes. Trent, what do you do, and tell us how it relates to TDM?
Yeah, so I am the Transportation Demand Management Coordinator for the city. So I review new development projects to see what they're doing to provide transportation options. So that could be installing a new B-cycle station or having lockers and showers for people who are commuting by bike. And then I also work on, with it being such a new ordinance, trying to make it better and more user-friendly and in line with city goals. So that is sort of my day-to-day with that.
You kind of touched on it both, but let's boil it down real simple, because TDM is it's part of us. It's been impacting all of us who visit and travel around the city, but what is it actually? What is TDM?
Yeah, so transportation demand management it's a kind of a wonky concept, but what it really means is looking at different ways to make our transportation system kind of a little bit better balanced. So instead of having everybody drive their car to and from work, for example, we look at ways to say reduce that congestion by having some people take the bus, having some people bike, having some people carpool, having some people work from home. And so that's just an example using commuting, but then we also have to think about the systems that support that. So how do we make it easier, faster, more convenient for people to choose those different modes? And that kind of balances out our system a little bit better. And that's good for both making sure there's not a ton of traffic, but it's also really good for the environment. It's also good for people's wallets. It's also good for people's health. And so there's all of these things underlying it, but it's kind of this big wonky concept. And then when we dial it in, the City of Madison has done something which is a transportation demand management ordinance that really is kind of Trent's expertise, where he gets to work with developers on some specific things.
Lucky you, Trent.
Oh, it's
yes.
A lot of fun.
But before we get to the ordinance, I do want to just pull out the fact that there are so many options, and it's not just do I take my bike today? Do I take the bus today? There's strategy here. There's a purpose for this. Okay, so since we touched on the ordinance, do you want to talk about the ordinance now? Should we go there?
Yeah.
So what is it, and what do we need to know about that?
Yeah, so the TDM ordinance was adopted in winter of 2022, and then it came into effect in June of 2023. And before that, it was sort of a piecemeal situation where certain developments had to consider TDM strategies, but others didn't. And so just based on feedback from different stakeholders and looking at recommendations in the comprehensive plan and other city plans and policies, it seemed to be just with how different efforts such as BRT were going, that there really needed to be a ordinance that supplemented the infrastructure planning in place. And so, there's the zoning code that has certain requirements for bike parking, which is related to TDM, but not necessarily things outside of that can really push the envelope and help, us get return on investment from the millions of dollars that are going into bus rapid transit and different bike infrastructure projects that you're seeing throughout the city, and have it be more predictable and something that's easy to understand, not just a wonky pie in the sky, like here's what we should be doing, but more consistent, and really able to leverage the investments that we're making in the city.
Yeah, so it involves BRT, but this is different, right? I mean, obviously BRT is part of the pie or the puzzle or the pizza or the whatever, but it's separate, right? I mean, it's involved, but it's different, right? And I don't want people to get confused with thinking TDM is BRT or whatever, because there's so many different.
And the acronyms.
Yes, and all the acronyms, A, B, C, D, F, G, yes. Yes. So parking, you did mention parking a little bit, so it does make sense that parking would fit into this equation. How does it fit into the equation?
So when new apartments or big office buildings have a lot of parking, that really induces more people to use their car. And when there's a lack of balance, I would say, between other modes, that really doesn't incentivize people to use the bus to go to work, or if they're at their apartment and trying to get downtown, if they have no other option to have a bus pass available to them, or to have a B-cycle station nearby, it really leads to a situation where cars are the only option for people. So TDM is really trying to balance that and promote other options for people, and actually have those options be available, and not just have situations where there's parking but there's not a secure bike room or things like that really allow people to say, yeah, I could clearly drive my car here, but it's more fun to ride a bike, or it's easier to take the bus and more convenient. I can play on my phone or whatever it might be.
Sure. Interesting. So my guess would be that anybody who's not used to TDM would not like that. They would not like that there's not enough parking for their vehicle. How do you deal with those hurdles when trying to help educate people about the benefits and everything like that? Like, the fact that riding a bike is fun is not enough for some people. It could be, and it is for a lot of people, especially here in Madison, because we love biking. But can you just kind of walk me through, how do you tackle those hurdles, I guess, when you're trying to get that buy-in and changing behavior, which is huge and hard, but possible?
Yeah, I think it's really about small steps, and TDM through the ordinance is not saying you can't have any parking. It's just saying there's going to be probably some parking in the majority of new developments, but there should also be amenities for people who need to take transit or need to bike, and not only need but want to do those things, and make it a competitive thing where I think just looking at development patterns over the decades, it's been focused on cars, and so TDM is trying to shift that narrative and provide people more options to go around the city and within the region, not only by car.
Sure. And it could be something that people are actually looking for eventually, or are now already, because they want to be able to ride their electric bike or their bike, and they want to know that there's parking there, or that there's a space for it all, and not just crammed in the back, right? Liz, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think just thinking about, the way Madison has done things over the last few decades, really, it's really about changing kind of what is our default. So instead of just going with kind of what's traditionally been looked at, again, in the last, let's say 50 years, it's kind of been really like, you're building a development. Okay, so let's think about how many cars are getting here, when they're getting here, and, where they're going to park. And so it's really just shifting that. It's just, adding a little challenge to that to say, hey, let's also think about, how are people biking here? How are people using transit to get here? And that's really, I think, the kind of big picture, holistic look at things that a lot of communities are starting to do. I think Madison's kind of a leader in it, and coming from other parts, working in other parts of the state and other parts of the country to a degree, Madison is certainly a leader in this. So I think it's been really great to come here and work on this. And I think another thing you notice when you come here, especially if you are coming from another community, is that it does kind of feel different to move around here. You see all the green bike lanes, you see the bus, you see again, the bus rapid transit system going up, but you also see, it being a lot more walk friendly. You see a lot more kind of what we call enhanced crosswalks. It just makes it safer. You see the signs on the side of the street where you see a child biking instead of just an adult biking. So all of these things are kind of trying to make it easier and more convenient. So it's not so much about changing people's minds as it is about making it more accessible for people to do what they already want to do. And so I think that's what Madison has been doing. And I think that TDM is just kind of like this big picture frame to see that through.
Making it easier.
Exactly.
Not make it so hard. Let's make it a little easier. Can you give us a little bit of examples of, you did touch generally on them, but do you have any specific examples that people can kind of put their thumb on, like, oh, that's a result of TDM?
Yeah, I would say it's not necessarily shovels in the ground yet, but the proposed men's shelter near Madison College, they had to submit a TDM plan, and through the process, they're going to provide a B-cycle station. They're going to have a bike maintenance station for people to fix up their bikes, and then also there's going to be an off-street path, so people can take the bus there with the new BRT route that's under construction, but also have a safer space to bike or walk to the shelter. And that's one of probably about 30 sites that I've approved with TDM plans. And there's other instances of offices where they have bike rooms for people and like loaner bikes. So obviously it is a situation where people can still drive there, but also if they choose to bike, they have a secure spot to put their bike and not necessarily just on a tree or something like that, where it's just, they don't know if they're going to be working and then they come to their bike and it's not there anymore.
We don't want that.
No.
We want to make it easier. It sounds like. Okay. So it's, and you're helping me kind of wrap my mind, and hopefully anyone listening, around the idea of, and the approach of TDM. It's kind of working through a lens of making sure that there's options that are accessible, like you were saying. So, and if I'm wrong, you correct me.
That's spot on.
We're just podcasting.
Yeah.
So you could correct me right in the spot. What happens if we don't use this approach?
Yeah, I think with the trajectory that Madison is on right now with our growth, we kind of need to have people move in different ways. We don't have the physical space to have every single person who lives here, who works here, driving in a single, what we call a single occupancy vehicle. Again, super nerdy, but we just don't have the space for that. And so I think that's another thing. We're on an isthmus. So we are so constrained. We can't keep growing. We can't keep widening our streets. Even if we wanted to do that, we can't do that. So I think I always want to underscore, like, that's not what people want anyways. So I don't think that's sort of an option that really was ever on the table, but if it was, we really just can't do it. So if we want to accommodate the growth that we are planning to see here in our whole Madison region, it's Dane County and even beyond, but we have to think about different ways to get around. And I think it also is part of why people want to come here. So it's kind of like, it's almost like a chicken and an egg kind of thing, because I think, yes, we're having this growth for a lot of different reasons. There's great jobs here. It's a nice place to live. The weather's generally good. But also, we have these amenities that people want to come to. They want to have, fit their family here because it's a safe place to ride and walk and all of these different things. So I think it's a little bit of both of those things, but I think that's kind of underlying a lot of this is like, okay, well, we know we're going to continue to grow. We're kind of on a pretty steady path of growth here. And so we want to do that with kind of that in mind, and also thinking about the environment. We have that as kind of a key part of our city's mission, is making sure we're doing things that are not negatively impacting climate change and are kind of preparing us to better react to that. And then the final thing I'll say too is, there's an equity piece here. So making sure that we're looking at things from a lens of people with low incomes, people who may not have access to driving a single occupancy vehicle. Maybe it's someone with disabilities. Maybe it's someone who can't afford a car. And so when we only invest in that mode, that's leaving those other people out. Sure. So I think that's just another piece of the equation, is making sure we're investing more equitably in those different modes of transportation that people both need to use and then want to use, and then making it better and more convenient for them to do that.
And it fits hand in hand with the mission and vision of our city. So that it just all works. It seems like it makes sense. Other municipalities, do they use this approach? Who? Any neighbors? Anybody? Is it just people out in different areas of the nation or world? Who else uses this?
Yeah, so I'd say that it definitely is concentrated on the coast, but the Twin Cities, both Minneapolis
Sure.
and St. Paul have TDM ordinances. So Denver is another example of a city that has a TDM ordinance.
Bigger cities.
Yeah, bigger cities, and then I'd say also like smaller suburbs, so like Cambridge, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. Everett, Massachusetts, another one, but also like Santa Monica, California.
Sure.
So a lot of cities, throughout the country use a TDM ordinance. So this is not, Madison's the only, city doing it. So it's something that we can see what other cities are doing and try to learn from those strategies, but also make it our own ordinance. And I feel like we're pretty successful at that. Just making sure that there's buy-in from the development community who are proposing these projects, but also that it's easy to administer from the staff side. I don't necessarily know if I need to get into the weeds of some of the TDM ordinance stuff, but
that's okay.
Yeah.
But other people are doing it. Larger cities are doing it. We're growing to be bigger and bigger. We're learning from other municipalities, it sounds like. And on top of all of this, you had, we know bus, we know bike, we know walking, we know driving, we know all of these different chunks that come into it. Where does rail come into this? That's the next big topic I think a lot of people are interested in here at the city.
Yeah, and I think, I think that's just another prong of this TDM strategy, but it's a little bit different than those other things, because the other things you talked about, at least in Madison, they're about generally moving around within sort of the greater Madison area. But the nice thing about passenger rail and what is kind of being the early stages of planning, which is extending the Hiawatha from the Chicago and the Milwaukee area to Madison and eventually on to the Twin Cities, is more of an intercity approach to TDM. So it's great if you live here, if you live in an area where you can walk and bike and take transit, but what if you're visiting? What if you're coming from Milwaukee? What if you're coming from Eau Claire, for example, and you're coming for the weekend? Okay, well, there's not really any other option right now other than driving, or flying. But if you're coming from one of those closer in cities, that's probably not what you're doing. So if you are going to be visiting, being able to get here without a car is just another way that we can support the overall goals of transportation demand management. So having people be able to take a train here, not have to drive and park, get off that train and be able to use those other modes to get to where they want to go when they get here. So I think it supports the overall mission of TDM, but it also is supported by those other strategies. So I think passenger rail wouldn't really work well in Madison if we didn't have those connecting modes for people to get, whether it's to get to their hotel or to get to a conference. And then also for Madison residents to then go travel as well. So if you're able to live here and you're like, hey, guess what? I don't even have to own a car. Or maybe it's a family of four and they have one vehicle. Hey, guess what? I don't have to use that to go to Milwaukee to, the Pfizer Forum, for example, to go to a Bucks game.
Sure.
We can just hop on the train. We can get there. We can come back later that evening or the next day or whatever it is. And again, it just kind of supports that overall kind of lifestyle and culture of being able to move in a lot of different ways. And so Madison is pretty, we're in the early stages. I think there's a lot of excitement, which is great. And I think Madison is trying to do what we can to move the process along. But, it's really in somewhat of the early stages of planning, but hopefully, during my time here, we can get that going. And, again, kind of thinking again about sort of that longer trip, being part of the TDM strategy.
Oh, there's so much to chew on. We're out of time. We have one more question. It's pretty obvious this impacts everyone who lives or visits the city, but why, this seems very simple as a question, but why should people really care that we're using this approach? Last question.
I think it really supports a strong, healthy, clean environment and community where people can get around how they want to get around. They can be safe doing it. And also the ordinance itself kind of promotes more of a systematic approach. So it's not just the city doing it. It's the private partners as well. And so I think getting everybody on board and having it be a much more kind of holistic approach is why it can work. And I think it's just overall going to make sort of quality of life better in Madison. I think that's the bottom line.
Love that. Trent, last word.
Yeah, I see TDM as something that benefits everyone by providing just more transportation options and amenities. It obviously is in line with city goals and, the comprehensive plan recommendations, but it also helps people who live or work here in Madison have, different ways that they can get to work or, go to a show or go to a Badgers game. And then from the development standpoint, it doesn't necessarily seem like it's a burdensome thing to require these different amenities because it makes an apartment more attractive for people to live there. And then through the TDM ordinance, we're also trying to encourage more development along transit-rich areas of the city, and especially having affordable units there is really a way to, from an equity standpoint, make sure that it's not just those luxury apartments that aren't affordable, but also having people who don't necessarily have those means to afford on East Wilson Street those apartments, but just to have options where people can access jobs and not necessarily rely solely on their car to do that.
So as we're wrapping up, transportation demand management, to me, seems like we're not only reacting, but we're being proactive with the demand. And how can we manage all of the means to make it easier for everybody to get to where they need to be?
Exactly.
Thank you. Liz, Trent, thank you so much for stopping by. I don't think that this is the last time we'll be talking about TDM as it kind of evolves, but thank you for coming. And if you have a question or anyone listening has a question or an idea for an upcoming episode for Everyday Engineering, you can follow us on social media. We're on X, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, YouTube, watching here, and on Apple iTunes, because as always, we're here for you every day in engineering.